I'm going to be a little bit selfish here, Stephanie, because this is something that I encounter a lot that as a vendor is a source of frustration for me. But beyond me, me and Sal being vendors, let's say as accounting professionals or CPAs, this
Mhm.
is something that I notice is does become an issue, or is an issue for a lot of business owners. So I'm interested to get your take on it, and that is
You bet.
whether whether it's an employee you would be
Mhm.
hiring. It could be challenging or promoting an existing employee that you think has the ability to kind of step up, take on more, and wants that. Or it could be that idea, like we talked about earlier, of hiring those outside vendors, or if you're the solopreneur, or building that really good team of professionals around you.
Mhm.
Um, I know there is, obviously financial constraints to a lot of
Yeah.
business owners, or financial constraints are a consideration. One of the other things I also noticed though is that um, there's this disconnect between, earlier we talked about working on the business. And I think one of the things that's fundamental to working on the business is understanding that you need a certain level of infrastructure, not only to operate, currently, but to evolve and grow.
Mhm.
And of course, let's be honest, the name of the game in business, there's a great sense of fulfillment that comes from business and rising to the challenge and pride. But most people are in we're in a profit generating mode here, right? We've got a profit motive. So the idea of spending extra dollars, whether it's on building the professional team of vendors, um, making that good hire that you really
Mhm.
should, promoting somebody, giving somebody a raise. It tend A lot of times I know that financial element deters a lot of business owners from building that resilient team. How do you, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you kind of coach business owners through that, like not letting the dollars always get in the way of taking those steps?
That is such a great question because that's a really common challenge. And usually, where I like to start the conversation is going back to what are our goals here and what is the real purpose of the business. And this is where business owners have to be crystal clear with themselves about what they really want from their business versus starting to compare their success with other people's appearance of success. If you have a business and it's in the same industry and somebody's going gangbusters and you're still relatively small, asking yourself, oh well, is my business supposed to look like this over here? I mean, how am I going to get there and how am I going to stretch? The question to really ask is, do I want to be like that other company? Do I even want to be that big? And so everything needs to be aligned with what we really want because nobody starts a business to create a situation for themselves they don't want, right? I mean, most of us start a business because we saw a better way of doing something. And so we created an avenue for ourselves to be able to do that. So I think going back to your why, why did I start this business? What is really my purpose? What was I hoping to achieve? And answering those questions, revisiting those answers, and then saying, okay, if it's going to take employees in order for me to do that, then what I'd say, and I think you gentlemen will like this answer, I always encourage people to visit with their accountants and do some
Yeah.
financial benchmarking because it may very well be that you're going to have to pick up an employee like you're just teetering on the precipice, right? We're breaking even, we're not super profitable, but based on our analysis and how much market share we have to gain and how much momentum we've had over the last 6 to 12 months, things are trending in the right direction. You ride the wave in the direction it's going, right?
Right.
So consult with your accountant, do some performance benchmarking, figure out what do you have to hit revenue wise, or better still, net profit wise, before you could absorb the risk of taking on an employee. And then when you do take on that employee, for all the reasons we've already discussed, you want to make sure you're setting that person up for success, because you are investing time, energy, and money in that person so that they will help pay for themselves as quickly as possible. So from start to finish, like the most essential first step with all of that is being very connected with your purpose, whether it's the purpose of the business, the purpose in hiring the employee, or the purpose of the role that the employee is supposed to fulfill and bring revenue back into the business. So this is another reason to have very good accountants on your team.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think going through that analysis, stopping and going through that analysis is just something that I know a lot of. It's almost like, I get it as a business owner. With all we've talked about, it can be tempting that you're like, oh, that's the last thing I feel like doing. But I think you're right. You're right in that, and Sal and I have talked in other content we've put out about revisiting your why, or just defining what your why is. And I think a lot of times your why doesn't need, it doesn't necessarily, it's got financial and non-financial elements. And the reason I say that, bring that up, is that you said you might look at a competitor, right? And to your point, you don't necessarily want to be like them in terms of scale, transaction volume, gross revenue, employee count, because it doesn't align with your why.
Exactly.
Your why might be a completely different combination of, a financial component and a work-life balance component, whereas the profit motive for the competitor company you're looking at is completely different, and that's why they're trying to, scale to a different level and achieve a different type of, sales volume. So I think,
Right.
starting with your why, I think, is important in that regard, to make sure, one, you're not comparing apples to oranges, but two, to your point, to help you wrap your head around, now that I'm refocused on my why, I can make a decision instead of just only on financial elements. Is this advancing the ball, or is this getting me closer to realizing my why and those goals for my business? Whether it's, investing, like you said, in the employee you need, or building the team of contractors, like what's going to advance the ball
Exactly.
towards me realizing, that why.
Right. No, that's a great point. And one of the items that you touched on, Stephanie, and you just mentioned as well, Anthony, is, potentially it may not be an employee route that you go down, and you may end up looking for some of these vendors that can provide certain services.
Yes.
It seems like more and more, and every day that goes by, it's almost like there's pretty much nothing out there that can't be found through a vendor, right? In that, people are really specializing in different type of services, even professional services, and you can, as a small business owner, you can use that to your advantage, because it does take, when you do use a vendor, and you have that vendor client type relationship, you can really task that vendor with certain processes that you want done. And,
Yes.
and I think when you're doing it that way, you take away that element of the employee, the kind of the biases that you might have with an employee, or, because you're going to be working with a particular employee and potentially seeing them on a day-to-day basis, and you're going to have personality issues, you can eliminate a lot of that stuff by looking for and utilizing a vendor. And I think, that does really help, especially a smaller solopreneur that's just getting started, before they need that, whole department of X amount of employees, to really explore that vendor element, because I think, those vendors are providing a service. And if they don't do it well, I think it's easy for the business owner to say, hey, I'm going to move on to the next vendor that provides this same service. So I think that it's great. It's great advice, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity nowadays, because especially with this gig economy, there's pretty much, from graphic design to accountants, there's pretty much, there's nothing out there that can't be kind of carved up and sold in terms of a vendor type service or relationship.
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head with, not only are you getting the services of someone who has a very specific area of expertise, but it was a very astute observation to say the accountability factor comes much more easily, especially
Oh yeah.
if someone is adverse to confrontation, whether real or perceived. There are a lot of people who they're very relationship oriented, and one of the most difficult things for them with respect to having employees is the prospect of having to fire someone. They don't want the confrontation. It feels messy to them. Whereas, exactly as you said, if you're using the services of a vendor, especially maybe as that baby step,
Yeah.
like with you guys, you come in, you get the books set up. Maybe somebody doesn't need a full-time bookkeeper because their business isn't at that size yet, but they
Right.
use you to get the structure of everything as it should be in place. And it's like rent a CFO instead of having to pay
Yeah.
for a full-time comptroller that you don't even need yet.
Yeah.
And this lets them cut their teeth in a way that's got far less risk and a lot of upside.